What famous person did horrible things that people largely forgot about? Story 1, Anne Perry, aka Juliette Hume. She's now an author of historic detective novels, but when she was a teenager, back in 1954, she and her friend Pauline Parker savagely murdered Parker's mother over threats of separating the pair. You may be familiar with the story from Peter Jackson's film, Heavenly Creatures. She did 5 years, moved to England and changed her name to Anne Perry, where she's still living pretty happily and anonymously making money off her books. Story 2, Karl Malone. Recently discovered when he was 20 years old, he impregnated a 14-year-old. It came to light I guess during the most recent All-Star Week since they wanted him as a judge for the dunk contest. My mind is blown by this shit. It got swept under the rug during his career, and when he is asked about it, he says it's his own business and no one else's. Nah fam, you're a child molester and got to live the life of a free man who made millions. Fuck him. Story 3, Mother Teresa was actually a psycho cunt who neglected orphans, denied them medical care despite receiving millions in donations to do exactly that, and, as is tradition, she defended a child molesting priest. When asked why she was being such a cunt to the orphans, she said the sick must suffer like Jesus Christ on the cross. She believed suffering was a gift from God, hoarded money, and fought against the empowerment of women as a solution to poverty. Story 4, Abraham Lincoln shipped 453 former slaves to a small island in the Caribbean where they were supposed to be indentured servants for 4 years picking cotton before being freed and given some land and money. The ship that was supposed to follow behind with food and building supplies for them never left, and they spent the next year and a half sleeping on the dirt in huts infested with insects before the 350 survivors were rescued and brought back to the U.S. Story 5, while holidaying in Ireland, Matthew Broderick crossed to the wrong side of the road and had a head-on collision with a car which killed both the occupants, a woman in her 20s and her 60-year-old mother, and gave his girlfriend who was in the care, actor Jennifer Grey, such severe whiplash she needed surgery to avoid being paralyzed. Despite facing a charge of causing death by dangerous driving, it was downgraded and he was fined a grand total of $100. Story 6, this is my take on it. I can never say he actually molested any children, but he definitely was a very traumatized man, with serious mental health issues and a lot of enablers, who continuously allowed him to have inappropriate relationships with kids. If a grown man asked me to allow him to have a sleepover with my kids, I'd sure as shit shut that down before he even finished the sentence. I don't care if it's Michael Jackson, that shit is weird as shit. Story 7, Low-Key, Karl Malone. He literally impregnated a 13-year-old girl when he was 20. Fucking disgusting. It's not to say that no one talks about it, because sometimes it is brought up. But me and several of my basketball friends didn't know about it until we were in our late teens, despite following the NBA consistently. Also, the NBA never really disowned him and he's still revered as one of the all-time greats, despite his unforgivable actions. Story 8, Pope John Paul II was well aware of pedophile scandals and dangerous sexual predators among people closest to him, and not only he didn't punish them in any way, but willingly let them keep on working with children and reoffending. In one case even including sick or terminally ill ones in children's hospitals. He covered their asses for the rest of their lives, and aside from a few slap-on-the-wrist incidents, they never served any jail time. Story 9, not that famous, but singer Gloria Trevi was an accomplice to the kidnapping and rape of several girls between the ages of 9 and 14. She got a joke of a sentence, and now people idolize her because she's so brave after all she's been through. Fortunately, a U.S. law exception allowed 2 of the victims to open a new case against her, this time in U.S. courts where corruption from Mexico can't protect her. Hoping she gets what she deserves. Story 10, to put in context, the current government wasn't so far from a theocracy itself, and Catholics were treated like shit, fined for not attending Anglican services, forbidden to get a degree unless they changed religion, and priests were often tortured and executed. What Fox, really Catesby, he was the one in charge of the conspiracy, wanted wasn't any better, but they weren't exactly living under some chill, enlightened government. Story 11, Alexander Graham Bell, yes, the telephone guy, campaigned for and eventually helped to outlaw sign language in both deaf and hearing schools, hoping to integrate schools with both deaf and hearing students. Instead, he ended up depriving deaf students who were not able to hear of language. The last of these laws banning sign in the US was finally repealed in 1979. Canada didn't finish ridding themselves of these laws until 2010. Story 12, despite being known as the great emancipator for his role in ending slavery, Abraham Lincoln held racist beliefs and espoused white supremacist views, such as advocating for the deportation of black people to Africa or Central America. Plus, his policies towards Native Americans were oppressive and contributed to the forced removal of thousands of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands, including the Navajo and the Dakota. Story 13, I recently found out that the Foo Fighters used to be staunch advocates for an AIDS denial group called Alive and Well, the bass player read the book and the whole band followed him down that path. They actually took part in a documentary and put on benefits concerts for the group back in the early 2000s. They took the information for the group off of their website in 2017 but have never acknowledged or said anything about it. Story 14, many of our modern-day medical practices were made by Nazis. In fact, the very first non-smoking was made by Nazis. They also discovered the dangers of alcohol and pesticides like DDT before anyone else and actively put an effort to stop use. Because of the experiments they performed during the Holocaust, we gained a massive breakthrough in medical sciences, but it was at the cost of massive human rights violations and violence. Story 15, and somehow I imagine he wouldn't be cool with his unconscious body being gang-raped by a bunch of men. Way too many men think it's fine to touch women when they are unconscious, because no harm, no foul. But literally all of them would not be comfortable to the same happening to them. Funny how it's always different when the roles are reversed. CeeLo Green should put his money where his mouth is if he really believes that. Story 16, James Marion Sims is known as the father of modern gynecology, and is credited with developing surgical techniques that have since been used to treat many gynecological conditions. Sims developed these techniques by conducting experiments on enslaved black women and immigrant Irish women without anesthesia. The women he experimented on were subjected to great pain and suffering, and many of them did not survive. Story 17, Alec Baldwin was is a huge piece of shit, evidenced more than 15 years ago when a voicemail leaked of him completely shitting on his then 12-year-old daughter. Should have ended his career. Who would work with someone like that? Instead, he blew up even bigger staying on 30 Rock and now look, he murdered someone. Not a doubt in my mind, he had some kind of axe to grind with that poor woman and found a way to shoot her. Story 18, Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page had a 13-year-old girlfriend, Lori Matix, who was basically kidnapped, her words, and made available to him for sex whenever he was in LA. She quit the relationship, or was told to stay away, depending on who you ask, shortly after she turned 16. No one seemed to care that much about it at the time and no one ever talks about it now. Except every now and then on social media, I guess. Story 19, Straight Up. Michael Jackson. There are so many artists who have simply only spoken to like 16-year-old chicks, take Jesse Lacey, for example, and he and his band completely get written off. But we know Michael Jackson had sleepovers with little boys. Hypothetically speaking, even if he didn't do anything really bad with those boys, that is still completely inappropriate and for some reason nobody really cares. Story 20, a lot of people say that because he was never charged, he's automatically innocent. Also, he's still immensely popular. And although there's no proof he raped children, there's proof he was up to a lot of other shit. He had a security system in front of his bedroom. He had porn lying around, which had the kids' fingerprints on it. Either way, the stuff he did was highly inappropriate and he was far from innocent. Story 21, Kobe Bryant was a rapist, which made all the fawning tributes to him after that helicopter crash, especially on Reddit, doubly nauseating. 9 people died in that crash, including multiple children, and the only one anyone in the media talked about was the rapist, whose death was such a goodbye. The only tragedy was that he wasn't in that helicopter alone, or possibly with his impossibly vile attorney. Story 22, XXXTentacion, also known as Yase Dwayne Onfray beat and strangled his pregnant ex-girlfriend Geneva Ayala so badly that he fractured her jaw, nose, and eye socket. He was shot to his death while he was awaiting his trial for the domestic violence incident. The public's attention shifted to Yase's passing, and he was portrayed as a victim. After that, people seemed to forget about what he did to Geneva. Story 23, Christopher Walken may have murdered someone. A girl disappears while on a boat with Walken and another guy. Nobody was ever charged and it was quietly swept under the rug. They said they didn't know what happened and never gave a further explanation. I forget who the other guy was. The girl was Natalie Wood. The case was reopened a time in the 2010s I believe, and it went around the news for like a day. Story 24, John Hamm was a part of a serious hazing allegation at the University of Texas. He supposedly beat the crap out of a pledge for not remembering fraternity trivia. The pledge suffered a fractured spine and was also led around the room with the claw of a hammer under his genitals and eventually had his pants set on fire. The chapter got shut down and John was named as one of the most serious offenders.